for taking the time to make us part of your morning or your afternoon or your middle of the night. Thank you so much. And we're here with Ada Limón, which we're really excited about. Welcome. And just to do a general lay of the land and greeting, we hope that you'll make yourself a cup of tea, that you'll settle in, or maybe you're listening to this while going for a walk. But we hope that you'll our intention is that this is a space to have a little time outside of time to connect with ourselves and each other and with the natural world. And poetry. Oh yeah, there's that. So that is our hope for this space. And after spending some time with Ada, James and I will talk about her and her work a little bit more. And then we'll give everyone a break around the halftime mark, just so you know to pace yourself and all of that. And James, maybe I'd love you to chime in on this, but the seed that this was born of for people who are new with us, our brilliant idea of 2021.
Well, the original seed, which I think was spoken into being by Danusha, which was that we want to, especially in the early part of the pandemic, we just wanted to spend time doing things we love with people we love. And that included each other, as well as the people that we invite to be a part of these webinars, like Ada, and the people who come to these webinars now who have formed their own community. And so we're so grateful to you for inviting us into your space on this Friday morning / afternoon / middle of the night, depending on where you are. And just a quick reminder that the chat is a great space for, reacting, connecting. If you have any questions, please do put those in the Q&A. We'll get to those during the pauses. And there'll be a break about an hour in. So we'll have a little movement time, a little music time. And then we'll come back after that with just Danusha and myself.
Yes, lay of the land. So welcome. And Ada, you're fending off an ice storm as well.
Yes, it's not terrible outside, but yeah, we had an ice storm overnight and now it's primarily snowing. So that's hopefully will keep our power on and our connection going, and we shouldn't have a problem, but fingers crossed.
Right.
Fingers crossed. And we were talking a little bit about how we've survived these kind of wild years.
Mm.
How has poetry been a part of that for you? Or has it felt like it's been a part of surviving? How has that been?
I think in the very early days, when everything was still really new and really terrifying, it was hard for me to find solace in poetry.
Yeah.
And I think I felt sort of let down by language. Everyone was like, now more than ever, we need poetry. And I was like, no, we need a vaccine.
Right.
I was like, oh. So I think that it took me a little while to come back to language. But it was there. And when it came, I was so happy. I was like, oh, right, of course, like this is the thing that centers me. And I think for me during, the entire time of the pandemic, it's been a way of entering the world and sort of saying, I'm still here. And I think that it's been hard to say that, I haven't been traveling much. I haven't been doing much at all. And so I think that writing myself into the world has been something that I needed to do, to sort of raise my flag to the world and say, I'm still here. I'm still surviving. I'm still going. And I still believe very much in the power of language and in the power of poetry.
I love that phrase, writing myself into the world. Like, I'm coming back. I'm coming.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like reminding yourself you're still here too, because I think in these disembodied times, it's like we don't have each other as much to sort of bounce things off of. And so, I am still here too. And Ada, I think it's really good for people to hear that you went through that period of maybe doubt or uncertainty. I mean, for me, it was just panic and anxiety. It's like, it's hard to write under those conditions, and
Yeah.
especially under the conditions of the country we were living in at that point too.
Yeah, that's true. And
yeah, I think for me, there was a big part of, I can write from sadness. Anger, I can write from, it's harder. I should say it's not harder to write from, it's harder to get something good.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to write from anxiety.
Yeah.
It's really hard to write from fear. I think that is really one of the most silencing emotions that I have. And so I can be in the pit, in the well of sadness, and be able to kind of write and be like, okay, this was helpful. But anxiety, I think, it very much stops the throat, for me. So that was a tough one. I had to kind of pull my way through it, get there eventually.
Yeah.
I'd never thought of differentiating between those states in terms of effective writing states, other than the anger one. I guess we know it's hard to pull that off, but it's hard to do anything in the state of anxiety.
Yeah.
And writing included. I remember, right before the pandemic happened, I was traveling with Naomi Shebnai. Life was amazing and fun and poetical. And she told me a thing that her old neighbor said, or friend in Texas, and it was, don't think in the dark.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's the smartest thing, because then we're just anxious and nutty, and don't think in the dark. Just don't do it.
No, it's very true. And I feel like for me, it's one of the reasons I love what you guys are doing here and the sort of focus in terms of nature, because I feel like that was really, language brought me back to myself, but it was also, I had to decenter the self a little bit. And decentering the self, when I say I was writing myself back into the world, I had to sort of surrender a little bit to the bigger world, to the forces of nature, and be at peace with that. And what brought that peace was sort of the ongoingness, what would go on without me if something did happen to me. I love thinking about, what do trees think of us? Are they like, oh, I wonder how long she'll be here? Like the fleeting life, fleeting life of that one. I wonder if it's like how we think of little hummingbirds or, robins, what robins have like a 2 to 3 year lifespan. And I wonder if we're like that to a tree. But I feel like that, like knowing that and losing that real desperateness to maintain the I felt like a shedding that was really necessary. And I don't know if it would have happened without the pandemic. I don't know.
Yeah.
That inner shift. I love the synchronicity. I had written on my notes of just, things I might be curious about or want to bring into the space. And I wrote, it was a very rough note. It was, there's something about surrender. I don't know what it is, but I feel like that's something to touch into. And then you just brought it in that way of, I had to let go of the I. Right. And we had to, I think it's because we had to let go of our story. We sort of got taken out of our narratives.
Right. I do this. I do that. This is who I am.
Right.
Yeah. I show up. I do this. I'm,
I have a self. I have an identity. And it's part of this really long, complicated story with all these amazing plot twists.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, I once again, I make a soup. Pretty big shift, and kind of enormous. But speaking of that shift in your work, I'd love to hear one of your new poems from the new book.
Yeah, so this is the book that is coming out in May 10th, and I just have the author copy, the uncorrected proof. Of course, I'm sure any of you who've had an uncorrected proof, you'll love it, but then you're also like, but there's typos. But that's of course what gets fixed by that's why it says uncorrected. but this, the type A person in me is like, but it's really beautiful. My mother did the cover.
Oh, wow, that's so great.
And she's done the cover of all my books, but this
I
is
didn't know that.
one of my favorites so far. And I think I'll just say from the beginning that this is a different book for me, I think. But I think it's the book that I've been waiting to write for a little while. I think it's the book I've been trying to write for a long time. And I think in many ways, I wanted to write a book that surrenders to something bigger. And I wanted to write a book that honors, like does honoring. And yet, even when I was younger in graduate school, I started out trying to write poems, and people would say, you can't write poems about a grandmother. There's too many poems about grandmothers. I was literally told that. And I remember being like, but I want to do a book of honoring like my family and my ancestors and my lineage and trees and birds and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know what it was, but this book is now that. And I think in some ways it's been a long time in the making. And so it feels very personal, yes, but it also feels like it's been there. And now it's gotten to come to the surface. I'll read because we just had Groundhog Day. I think I'll read the first poem of the book. And this is called Give Me This. I thought it was the neighbor's cat, back to clean the clock of the fledgling robins low in their nest, stuck in the dense hedge by the house. But what came was much stranger, a liquidity, moving, all muscle and bristle, a groundhog, slippery and waddle thieving my tomatoes, still green in the morning shade. I watched her munch and stand on her haunches, taking such pleasure in the watery bites. Why am I not allowed delight? A stranger writes to request my thoughts on suffering. Barbed wire pulled out of the mouth, as if demanding that I kneel to the trap of coiled spikes used in warfare and fencing. Instead, I watch the groundhog more closely, and a sound escapes me, a small spasm of joy I did not imagine when I woke. She is a funny creature and earnest, and she is doing what she can to survive.
Wow, I just love that. I love that spasm of joy. That's so great. And I love hearing too, Ada, that this has been a book that you've wanted to write for a long time, because I feel like for whatever reason, maybe it is part of the pandemic or just where we are going as a culture, it feels like more and more people are focusing on delight, joy, some of these things that felt like there were rules against writing about them too much in poetry.
Yes.
It wasn't cool enough to talk about delight, kindness, joy, whatever. And in a previous webinar, Jane Hirschfield said something about not wanting to be rude to joy, that she realized she had been rude to joy too much in her writing. Yeah,
I think there's something about that truly. And I also think that we valued poems, and I mean, I think we still do, and that's a beautiful thing too, but we value poems that go into the darkness and expose maybe the harder parts of humanity. And I think we also value poems that tell the story of the I, right? That have that narrative. And I, love poems like that. I've written poems like that. And so I think sometimes it's hard to write a poem that can have meaning if it's just about watching an animal or a tree or, right? Like you want it to be like, oh, right, this is important. But how do you do that without also acknowledging all the other things that are important too?
I love that. And I love, there's a quality in your work, I think throughout your work too, of just, it's like you're talking to a friend. There's a real intimacy.
Mm,
And I think that's one of the things we crave most as readers is like, oh, this
mhm,
person's just telling me about
mm.
this, across the table. Was that a really conscious sort of aesthetic choice you made at some point, or just kind of how you found your footing? Um,
Yeah, I think very much so. I think that I really in the shift of probably with the book Bright Dead Things
yeah.
was where I started to really try to connect in a new way. And try to be like, what is it to just write to you, right?
Mm.
To really just
Yeah.
say, like, this is the truth and this is what I need to tell you. Um, as opposed to kind of maybe obfuscate for my own protection, which is useful sometimes and necessary sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think that was a big shift. And I think that it was really my need for that connection and communication
Mhm.
um, that was very deep and became really an anchor to my work. And it continues on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like what you were saying about decentralizing the sort of small self
Mm,
in order to get to the truer self that is
yeah.
more of that like observer. And I sort of feel that in the poems in this new book that there's an intimacy, but there's also like a larger point of view, like a more
Yeah.
universal perspective almost,
Yeah.
even when you're talking about your own personal experience. So it's a bit of a paradox and maybe just part of your growth as a writer, just that you've reached this point where you can talk about large things through your own personal experience. I mean, that's an
Yeah.
amazing thing.
I love that you said that because I think I'm very interested in a sense of ongoingness, right? Like what happens without me in it? What happens, when my time ends or when, and I like the idea of recognizing mortality and not necessarily being, I mean, yes, being scared by it, of course, but also recognizing that that's life. I think this book is organized in seasons. And I think the cycle aspect was really important to me in the sense that it would continue and does continue without me making up the sections, right? Like
Right.
those are just sections that exist and they would just exist forever. So I think that was really important, that sense of ongoingness and that sense of honoring, and also the way of, how do you write about the self without always privileging the self,
Mm.
which I think is really hard.
Yeah, it's the
I
hardest.
mean, the question about how we live too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I guess turning to the natural world in this way in writing, it's just so obviously bigger than us. It includes us, but we are that small thing in it. It's such a powerful turn.
Mm.
And I know you grew up largely in California, right? In
Yeah, yeah,
Sonoma area.
yeah,
And would you speak to your sort of relationship to nature, but growing up and what
yeah.
that was like?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very, rural setting. It was, a house where it was, all oak trees around it and a little sort of the alleyway. We called it the alleyway. It was a tree lined trail that went to the bus stop, and across the street was a creek, the Calabasas Creek, which is, for me was an endless source of fascination, whether it was roaring and flooding or a tiny like dribble. I always was like, oh, it's a full of life. It also had the Highway 12 went over it, or Arnold Drive went over it, and so it was this kind of wonderful sense of being underneath. And as a kid, I was very interested in what it was to climb down to the creek. And then there was like life up there, but there was so much life down here. And I
Mm.
think even now, if I sort of sit down and I want to write a poem or something's coming to me and I don't know how to get there, I start to think about that place.
Mm.
Oh,
Wow.
that's rich to have kind of an inner underworld,
Yes.
you
And it
know.
was like a physical spot. And every time I go home, I visit my creek. I visit my creek. I say hello.
Mm.
Oh, I was just driving down Arnold Drive a few days ago, and if I'd known,
I would have told you where to stop. And
I
like my
would've
creek is like, it's like a tiny corner. It's like one of those things that you would never really know that like, it's not like a, maybe I'll put a sign up one day.
put a
Yeah.
sign up. I think this should say like Ada Limon's, alleyway,
I
creek.
think
dropping
it should just say the underneath.
Oh, the
Yes.
underneath.
Yes.
That's excellent.
Just that.
Yes.
Underneath. The underworld. Well, I mean, it is interesting how I'm just forming this as I'm saying it, but this idea of the underworld being something very dark and associated with death, because of course we're buried in the earth. But there's something about reclaiming that underworld
Yeah.
Mhm.
as a magical afterlife and in life, and so much is going on in the soil.
Yeah.
Someday us, but
Yeah, and it's also the idea of like the secret life, right? Like we talk about voice all the time, and what does that mean? And as poets, we're always like, what does it mean to have a voice?
Right.
And I feel like it's always like it's like the self underneath the self.
Right.
And I
Right.
feel like that was sort of a physical representation of me
Mhm.
going down into it,
Mm.
and it was also a time when nothing was demanded of me. Nothing
Right.
was expected of me. It was the time where you just go to the creek. I'll just be down
Mm.
at the creek, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't, where do we find that time now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, can we please get that time back?
Yes.
Like, I really need that time when nothing is
Yeah.
expected.
It's like, I'm going to
Yeah.
go to the creek for a while.
Right.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I chose my school I wanted to go to as a kid. I mean, it was down in Marin,
Mhm.
but because there was a creek running through it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Came down a hill and into the ocean. I mean, I guess I didn't, my parents chose it, but they saw that I went just wild over the creek. There were tadpoles. And I was like, are you kidding me? I could go, why would I ever leave?
Yes.
But
And I feel like as Californians, there's a certain amount of obsession we have with water because we've got the ocean, but like there's also, a drought season. We're inland, like, we're an hour, like Sonoma, we're an hour away from the ocean. So you can see it from the mountaintop, but you're like, it's still dry. And so to have these water sources, they're so precious and they're so like this water, I think we get obsessed with that too.
That's so true. And I think that makes me want to give a prompt to the people listening is to write about the water, your own sacred water,
Mhm.
whatever that is, where you live, whether you're on an island somewhere, like where my family comes from, just surrounded by water in the Caribbean, or you live in a desert and what is the water to you? God, I think that'd be a great writing prompt for people who want to take that on, including myself.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
About the water. So just putting that out there as well. And we had a little question in the Q&A that I wanted to lob at you while we have you.
Of course.
Someone who's an early riser, this is Shari, said, I start my morning with breakfast and coffee, and then I eagerly await 7 a.m. when the slowdown shows up in my email inbox. Isn't that nice to hear? How do thinking about choosing and reading the slowdown poems affect your new work?
Mm.
And vice versa. How does your new
Yeah.
work, I guess, affect what you're choosing? So anyway.
Yeah. I think reading always affects our new work, right? We get ignited immediately, or we're like, oh, there's a possibility of that, or oh, reminds me of something I'm working on, or I'm interested in that interrogation, and here's this interrogation. So I think that's a big part of choosing poems is that it's hard not to choose poems that are like in conversation with what I'm interested in. But I'm also, I'll say that I'm a little bit guilty of being someone that really loves lots of different kinds of poetry. I always have. Enough so that like I kind of got accused of like, oh, is there a poem you don't like? That kind of like, and I'm like, I don't know if there is. And so I feel for me, it's, I do want to represent, a wide swath of voices and types of poetry. So that part is like, I'll be like, oh, this is something then there are poems that I don't even know if I truly can sink my teeth into, but I'm like, I think I just want to read it and see, what happens. So there's some poems are, still a mystery to me, and yet I still want to celebrate them. I think it would be boring if I just chose poems that were easy to understand or just connected to me in a personal way. So I'm always looking for things that are, representative of many different voices out there and many different modes of writing.
Yeah. I have a word for that. I call it being a liker.
Yeah, I'm a
I
liker.
think it's good to be proud of and just own it. I'm a liker. And with people, poems, I like things first. I just start off liking, and then until or unless something gives me a reason to feel differently.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm just like,
Still like it.
Sometimes it makes me a bad judge because I'm like, well, all these manuscripts could win,
Right.
I could make an argument for every single one.
I wait too.
Right.
But I think we should own it and be proud of it.
I like it. Okay.
And I also love the haters. There's people who hate things to start off with. That's great too. And then they want to warm up to it. But I have friends like that too. And I kind of admire it because they have.
Oh yeah. I have a friend who's such a grumpy poet and I adore him. But I'll say, oh, I love this poem. He's like, or like, I'll finish a novel. I'll be like, oh, that was just delightful. And he's like, ugh.
I find it kind of charming when people are like that. Like, I kind of want to be a little bit of a hater.
Yeah. Instead I'm like, oh, let's put all these weird poems up here.
I'm sure James relates to this too. James, I think you're a liker.
Yeah.
I am a liker. Yeah. Yeah. And it's so hard to say no to poems. I just feel like, I feel like it makes me a bad teacher in some cases because guys, I just love everything you're writing. Yeah. And I'm like, just keep writing what you're writing and keep reading poems, and your poems will change and get better and get more interesting. And that's it. Like, it's really easy.
It's really easy.
And I do really feel like that connection to each poem, and at least for me in the slowdown, like I can read it, if a producer is like, oh, I found a couple poems and I'll look at them. And at first I might be like, oh, I don't really see, a spark, and then read it again. And then I'm like, oh, I love this poem.
Now I love it.
Right.
Okay, that's really
I'm like, oh, that darn deep reading. It really
gets you every time.
That darn deep reading. I know. Well, speaking of which, we should have you read us another poem while we've got you. And we're also, for people it is turning pages here, for people who are newer in poetry world and have come here maybe from mindfulness world or other places, Michelle will be posting a link to, Michelle's our behind the scenes helper. She'll be posting a link to the slowdown so y'all can follow that as well and hear Ada read and talk about poems in her beautiful voice.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, what is with these slowdown hosts and the beautiful voices? So
well, I had pretty big shoes to fill. I was like, Tracy, I don't know if I can do this.
Oh,
she was like, you can do it. I was like,
do it.
I don't know. I mean, I loved it when she was on it. Even when, I was asked to kind of interview for it, I was like, oh, no. I listened to all of her episodes and she's brilliant,
You're doing it. You're done.
So, and I even asked her, I was like, do you think I can? Like, I felt like I needed her thumbs up,
A little cheer, a hype girl. You needed a hype.
Totally. Well, this is a poem that just came out, and so I thought maybe I would pay homage to it. And content warning, it is about infertility. So if you if you want to mute me right now, I will hold up the book when I'm done so you can know to join us again. This is my very first poem in poetry magazine. I started submitting to Poetry Magazine 22 years ago. So
let's get real about poetry.
Right.
Lest you think the publishing world is easy. Foaling season. 1. In the dew-saturated foot-high blades of grass, we stand amongst a sea of foals, mare and foal, all over the soft hillside. There are twos, small duos ringing harmoniously in the cold, swallows diving in and out, their fabled forked tail, where the story says the fireball hit it as it flew to bring fire to humanity. Our friend, the Irishman, drives us in the gator to sit amongst them. Everywhere, doubles of horses, still leaning on each other, still nuzzling and curious with each new image. 2. 2 female horses, retired mares, separated by a sliding barn door, nose each other. Neither of them will get pregnant again. Their job is just to be a horse. Sometimes, though, they cling to one another, find a friend, and will whine all night for the friend. To be released through the gate, the noses touch, and you can almost hear, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" 3. I will never be a mother. That's all. That's the whole thought. I could say it returns to me watching the horses, which is true. But also I could say that it came to me as the swallows circled us over and over, something about that myth of their tale, how generosity is punished by the gods. But isn't that going too far? I saw a mare with her foal, and then many mares with many foals, and I thought simply, I will never be a mother. 4. One foal is a biter, and you must watch him as he bares his teeth and goes for the soft spot. He's brilliant, leggy, and comes right at me as if directed by some greater gravity. And I stand firm and put my hand out first, rub the long white marking on his forehead, silence his need for biting with affection. I love his selfishness, our selfishness, the two of us testing each other, swallows all around us. Every now and then, his teeth come at me once again. He wants to teach me something, to get me where it hurts.
Ooh.
Welcome back if you want to come back.
Yes. Okay. Welcome back. Thanks for doing the book lift. Just gorgeous, Ada, really beautiful. And I was so struck by that line. Their job is just to be a horse. As a woman also who wanted a family and doesn't have one, in terms of children, that it's like figuring out what is your job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And I love the idea of just being a horse.
Just
Yeah.
being a
And what a beautiful thing that is. Like, oh, and they get to miss each other and they make their friends. Yeah.
noses. All of that. Yeah. It's just really beautiful and really moving. And the way that we see the poet inside of the poem making some sense of the world just through what are the animals doing?
Yeah.
What are they doing about their lives? That makes a kind of very basic sense to me as well.
Yeah, I think that the whole book in some ways, and I know, we're not here to talk about necessarily the book, but it's just because it's, as you guys know, I just got the arc, so it's all new to me and exciting. And so forgive me, but I feel like there's the whole book is really about what is it to watch deeply, and is that enough? And what is it to maybe work against the human need for epiphany? And I think that I have spent a long time wanting to transform something into something else. And I think as I have aged, I'm very curious as to what it looks like to let the world be. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It really
does.
does. There's one of our participants here, Kim Rosen, who teaches people to memorize poems, to put them, by heart. She's in a group of mine right now, and she said, I am at a stage where I don't think I even want the bells and whistles of an aha. I don't want that. And she said the same thing. Does that make sense? I don't want the aha. I just want the world as it is and to look at it. And I went, oh, okay. I've been wanting the aha. This is, it's another room to go into.
Yeah. And the aha is so wonderful because it gives us a sense of closure. And if we work against it, then we kind of have to give up a little bit on perhaps how we perform our endings, and perhaps on how we see even our lives as central and mechanisms of time.
Right. So that's back. Go
ahead.
I was just going to say that's back to what you said before, Ada, about that sense of ongoingness, being more interested in that than like, oh, huge epiphany, come down from that. Oh, another huge, it's like, can you just sustain the world as it is, as being this source of wonder and awe, no matter how small or slight that might seem.
Yeah.
Wow. Now I just have to go sit and think. This always happens after we have one of these sessions. Jason and I famously just sort of disconnect from the world for a while.
Right.
Like, whoa, I got to go walk in the woods for a while.
Right.
And I'm definitely already feeling that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's how poetry is too. It's like, that's the thing about even recording the slowdown. I'll read the episode and then I read the poem. And then sometimes like me and my producer, you just kind of have to sit there and be like, okay, like, should we start the next episode? Like, it's like so hard to, poetry does that. It makes you feel like you open all these doors, and how can you not want to walk through them all?
For the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is. I feel like it's walking through a number of doors or rabbit holes, whatever they are, but for the rest of your life.
Yeah. But isn't that fun? We're never going to figure it out.
I love that so much. I mean, that's what's so great, right? And we're never going to figure it out.
Yeah.
It's really exciting.
Yeah.
And then we're going to die.
Yeah. We're just going to allow.
Right. Which is also exciting.
Yeah,
it is.
And we're still not going to know a whole lot of stuff.
No. I mean, I think every time I start to think about anything I know for certain, I like something in me just starts cracking up.
Like, oh, you think you know that?
Right,
yeah. As soon
especially
as I'm like, well, one thing's for certain. I'm like,
no, don't say it. Don't say the thing.
I'm like, no, it's not.
I know. It's really true. It's so true.
Yeah.
Well, a few people are asking what was the name of that beautiful last poem you read.
Oh, thank you. That is a poem called Foaling Season.
Okay.
And it is in the February edition of Poetry Magazine. And it's also, if you want to just read it, it's up on my Instagram, Ada Limón Writer. I took a picture of it, so.
Yeah.
In case you don't subscribe to Poetry Magazine. I know.
It is still findable on Insta. So thank you so much. And I feel like we've had you for beyond the time you even.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. So talking about poetry is, dream.
And can we have a dog viewing? Because I feel
yes, absolutely.
Is that really possible?
Yes, of course. Hold on.
Okay.
Thank you. I didn't want to ask, but
oh my God.
This is the baby. This is the best baby.
Hello, little baby thing.
Oh. And this is Lily Bean.
This is Lily Bean, my little angel.
Oh my, and a poetry loving angel.
Yes.
This is really a moment.
If you're not melting right now, there's something wrong with you.
Can someone take a screenshot and send it to us?
Please.
It's like this is peak cuteness. So I just want to, we have a private Facebook group for this. Sometimes people will put their cats watching. So this is really one of those things we need. Thank you so much for humoring us.
Oh my gosh, of course. You know, she doesn't really understand Zoom, but she likes to be held. So that's okay.
Oh
Good.
my goodness. What a little nugget.
Yes, she's the best.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ada. We really enjoyed, I guess we're all meeting for the first time in this
Yeah.
format.
I
So
know. I wish we could be in person, and
I know.
someday we will.
Yes.
We'll have a little tea because we can't really handle caffeine, me and James.
I can't either.
Oh, great, perfect. We'll have some herbal tea.
Haven't had coffee in years.
Sad because it smells really good.
I love it. The only thing I can handle is like small squares of dark chocolate. Then I like that's just like okay.
That's
enough. Worth it.
Yeah.
That's worth it. I agree. So, thanks again. You're getting lots of love in the chat, and just
thank you all
for you and the slow down and your dog and all of it.
Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and you want to say goodbye, though, Bean?
Oh, I love
you. Oh, gosh.
All right. Thank you guys so much.
We love you both. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Oh, what a pleasure.
Okay, that was precious.
So precious. I'm glad you asked for the dog. I was afraid to ask, but I really wanted to see her.
I know. I didn't know if Lily Bean would want to be picked up, but she did not mind.
So, apparently not.
She was a lap dog. But there's always, when we are privileged to have amazing writers and thinkers visit, there's always so much more I want to talk about and ask. So apologies that we don't get to everything that comes up in the chat. James and I try to touch in on those things, in the Q&A in the remaining part of the session, but we also want to go with what is naturally coming up. But this idea that, again, is so surprising and wonderful to hear from Ada today is this idea of even going beyond epiphany in the writing, and can what is be enough?
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and just getting there, I was going to say, through that decentralizing of the self, like she was saying, which is kind of an idea in every world religion or every form of spirituality, is getting beyond the small self so we can access some larger self or soul or spirit or whatever you want to call it. And it does seem to happen for me, and I don't know if it's just getting older or maturing, but it does seem to happen, as she said, in just these smaller ways or these smaller moments. And it's when I turn away from myself and my desires and ideas and thoughts to the natural world or other people, really. That's when the epiphanies come and can lift me out of that sense of small self. I know some folks know that I woke up from an ice storm last night with no power, no internet, only a wood stove. Luckily, it's still going. And so, I had all these ideas of how I wanted and needed things to go, and they just went right out the window. And yet I could still feel wonder and awe for what was happening, and the way the trees are just bowed over with ice, just coated in ice, and how the birds are still, slipping through the icicles on the bird feeder to get their seeds. I mean, these are tiny things, but I think they're available to us in daily life, whether we're poets or not. I just think being a poet or a writer helps.
When you were saying that, I almost felt like you were dropping into a poem, the thing about the birds, slipping their beaks into those spaces between the ice to get seed. It's just so evocative. And I think it connects to Ada's groundhog poem in a way where it's like doing what she needs to do to survive.
Yeah.
To survive. And I think that's so much of what we do learn looking at nature and animals is, what are they doing to survive, to make their lives.
Yeah.
And what a busy job that is.
Yeah. And yet at the same time, it's what she said, why am I not allowed delight? That at the same time we're doing what it takes to survive. I think we also have to tend to that part of us, the delight, the playfulness, the joy, like we're always saying in these webinars, that the two pieces coexist and that they are all a part of survival and thriving in a larger way.
Yeah. Someone's asking, it's Joan. So hi, Joan, is asking about, can you talk more about the aha as closure? Do you think that leaving a poem as is without the epiphany leads to opening? Well, I guess it's a new thought for me anyway, to really sit with that. And I think of the poem by Jane Hirschfield called The Poet. And I kind of feel like reading it. Let me see if I can just read.
Find it and see if you can find that.
Yeah.
And I would say too, Joan, and to everyone, I think it has less to do with not sharing the epiphany than how you talk about it and how it's filtered. So, the idea might be not to filter it just through the small self, but to lift the self out of that and just, maybe describe the world as it is. Because Ada, in her new book especially, that's a little fresh for me, she has several moments of epiphany or joy that she's describing, or different ways that she's seeing things. And yet it feels like there's that intimacy and distance at the same time that's allowing her to achieve both. So maybe it's just about how much time and space we give the poem that we create that creates that sense of distance. I know we've talked a lot about, revising things over time and just tinkering with your drafts, very slowly giving them attention in order to get to that intimacy and distance that kind of coexist.
Oh, what a complete answer, and a really beautiful one. Thank you, James. How are we holding ourselves in that ending? Can we go to a bigger framework to reference? I think that is a way. And also sometimes it's just sort of something it's a smallness. There's a modesty that can live in a poem, which is what made me think of the Hirschfield poem. Maybe I'll just read it and then we can look at is there a big aha, an epiphany, or what is going on there? The Poet. She is working now in a room not unlike this one, the one where I write or you read. Her table is covered with paper. The light of the lamp would be tempered by a shade where the bulb's single harshness might dissolve, but it is not. She has taken it off. Her poems, I will never know them, though they are the ones I most need. Even the alphabet she writes in, I cannot decipher. Her chair, let us imagine whether it is leather or canvas, vinyl or wicker. Let her have a chair, her shadeless lamp, the table. Let one or two she loves be in the next room. Let the door be closed, the sleeping ones healthy. Let her have time and silence, enough paper to make mistakes and go on.
Yeah. I think it's great that you decided to bring that poem in, Danusha, because I saw an interview online where Jane talked about this poem, and she actually wrote this while she was on a residency. I want to say it was at the Bellagio Center.
That's
Am I getting that right?
In Italy, yeah.
In Italy, and on Lake Como, she's in this 13th century villa or something like that, and what she talked about was this idea of unearned luck, that she felt she hadn't earned the luck of being here. that there were other people writing just as worthy poems who deserved to be there as much as she did. And she was writing really badly until this poem came and just moved something within her. Maybe just, it's like Ada was talking about the idea of honoring someone else, or the people who are writing who are more anonymous and who maybe don't have this unearned luck to be in this beautiful, amazing place and have the time and space to write. So it's almost like the poem came to her as a gift to move this. And so it sounds like you were aware of that.
A little bit of that backstory, but I'm making other associations as you're talking about it in the way that you're talking about it, just to honor. And I think that in this space, we're especially looking at celebrating the natural world and connecting to the smallness of what is even around us in our backyard. Just when I said that, I tilted my head that way and I saw a pink flower just starting to bloom in this part of the year. And I don't know what it is because I'm in a new house here. But just seeing that, like, oh, what is that flower? And there's something very powerful, I feel, about that, noticing in a time, especially when we are so overwhelmed with the magnitude of the problems. What is it to actually be the people that then stop and notice the world around us? And how might we tend it differently as a collective if we are noticers? We have likers and haters today, but
and noticers.
And what if we're just noticers more and more? And certainly, I know that's a lot of our intention in holding this space, is to remind ourselves. James and I like to say this is our poetry church for ourselves, but that we hope that others receive a benefit from being in.
And to let, I think, the act of noticing be enough. That seems really important too, and that is maybe part of what we're saying about that idea of resisting easy closure, tying things up neatly. And I wanted to say too that one of our future guests, who happens to be with us today, Nicole Brown, another amazing poet, she pointed out that, perhaps what could be important is this idea of even like letting go of needing an epiphany. So not approaching the natural world or our daily lives with this agenda of like, oh, I must have an epiphany, or even the writing of a poem by saying, well, there has to be some sort of epiphany or change at its center, and instead just allowing whatever arrives to arrive and seeing how that lands, not putting pressure on ourselves or our senses to kind of manufacture something.
Yeah, some huge aha. When maybe I noticed a thing. I wrote down a quote and thought about talking with Ada about it, but we just, there's so many things to talk about. I can talk about it with you. And we'll take a break in a moment here. But Mark Doty quotes Yeats as saying, "All that is personal soon rots unless it is packed in ice and salt." All that is personal soon rots unless it is packed in ice and salt. And this being about craft and the writing of poems being a way of packing things on ice, preserving those moments.
Yeah, that word preserve is the one that came to me as well. And I often talk about this when I'm teaching and just in my own writing, that I truly believe that the act of poetry is about preserving moments or saving moments, that poems, even a longer poem or like a multi-part poem like Foaling Season, which Ada read to us, it's this series of closely held moments that have been kind of saved for eternity. Like she has these impressions, these feelings, just the emotion of that statement, I will never be a mother. Like the way that was packed in there is always going to be saved. And those of us who can access it are always going to feel what that's like. Even, I don't have any desire to be a mother. I don't have that part of myself, but I still know what that feels like through the poem.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I feel like it can sound a little cliche sometimes, perhaps to the haters out there, when we talk about moments, like we're always talking about staying present, being in the moment, and yet it's something that we often come back to in these webinars over and over again.
Over and over. That's where it seems to keep bringing us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again and again. And we're already at the part where we give people a little break, and we can get back to reading more poems and talking more about that thread that we're starting to pull, these threads that start to come through. How long do we do a break? About 5 minutes? Is that? It's been so long, James. We've been apart for so long. No, actually, we meet every Friday, you guys. That's the secret, is that we never stop meeting on Fridays with each other.
That's right. Yeah. So we'll take 5 minutes and folks can get up, move around, maybe stretch a little, refresh your tea, light your candle like Danusha has there in the background. And we'll come back with some more poetry and discussion. And if you have any questions, feel free to place those in the Q&A, and we'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well.
Yeah, we do our best. We know we're not following everything, but we are reading more of it than you know.
That's right.
We're trying, but we're definitely doing our best, and we love to see how involved you guys are in there. So thank you, and we'll be back in 5. So see you in a few.
Mother of the water, mother of us all, dreams a new beginning, streams and waterfalls, mother of the water, mother of us all, dreams and new beginnings, flowing over all, mother of the water, mother of us all, dreams and new beginnings, streams and waterfalls, mother of the water, mother of us all, dreams and new beginnings, flowing over all, mother of the water, mother of us all, dreams and new beginnings, streams and waterfalls, mother of the water, mother of us all, dreams and new beginnings, flowing over all, mother of the water, mother of us all, streams and waterfalls. Mother of the water, mother of us all. Dreams and new beginnings flowing over all. Mother of the water, mother of us all. Dreams and new beginnings, streams and waterfalls. Mother of the water, mother of us all. Dreams and new beginnings flowing over all.
Starting to welcome you all back. And I don't know how Michelle does this with the music, that we go from talking with Ada about the secret streams of her childhood to this mother of the water. So Michelle, please make us a Spotify playlist again. Those are part of my survival mechanism right now, is listening to those playlists. Thank you.
Yeah. So perfect. Such a perfect accompaniment. Mm.
Well, welcome back. And I know, James, somebody wanted you to read your poem, Awe.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let me pull that up really quickly.
Okay.
So I shared this poem with people on my email list and then people on some social media this morning, just in context of the ice storm that we received. So this one was about sort of the aftermath of another ice storm. And I find myself thinking a lot about awe and wonder and what that really is for us. So this is awe. It's a shiver that climbs the trellis of the spine, each tingle a bright white morning glory breaking into blossom beneath the skin. It can happen anywhere, anytime, even finding this sleeve of ice worn by a branch all morning, now fallen on a bed of snow. You can choose to pause, pick it up, hold the cold thing in your hand, or not. Few tell us that wonder and awe are decisions we make daily, hourly, minute by minute, in the tiny offices of the heart, tilting the head to look up at every tree turned into a chandelier by light striking ice in just the right way.
So many flavors of wonder and awe just in listening to that. Those white blossoms are just gorgeous. And that idea, James, inside of all the body's wonder, that idea that we can choose awe daily or minutely.
Yeah.
We can choose. I sort of went, when I heard that, my reaction was, we can. We can't. And then my mind went, yeah, you can.
Well, And now, like Ada, I'm a little like, is that true, or does it just choose us? Really, I
Oh,
I think maybe what I mean there, I'm just sort of checking
you're
BS
fact
detector
checking.
in my own poem, is maybe we can choose to leave the space for it, but we can't necessarily force it to come. Because what I wanted to say is, we maybe get this impression that we're all like, Walt Whitman or Emily Dickinson, like walking around like, oh, look at this, oh my gosh, look at this. And like, that was just a quiet moment for me on a walk on the trail by our house. And it wasn't until the following morning that I, just kind of got the little itch to write about it. And I'm like, oh, there was wonder, there was awe there, even though I paused for just, a few seconds, maybe a minute, picked up the ice, held it, and then let it go again. But
Yeah.
that was enough.
But that was enough. We want big things so often. We want a big epiphany. So maybe that's the thread that's coming out. We want something to be just to knock us over. Hollywood blasts all these blockbuster movies at us. They're really loud and intense and exciting. And fast food is what? Lots of salt and fat
Right.
and sweet. And we're so bombarded.
Mhm.
I think that we have to retrain ourselves to the very subtle. Like, oh, I picked up a piece of ice and I felt the shiver and coldness of it down my spine.
Mm.
How beautiful.
Mm.
And, I woke up for that moment.
Yeah.
Right. For that moment, I was awake.
Yeah. And those of us who intend or try to be present, I think we also crave big things, right? That like there must be some way to be mindful every single moment. And yet, I think that's too big. That's too much to hope for. It's like you're saying, I was awake for that moment at least. And then maybe the moment the next day when I was writing about it and surprising myself and realizing that it was naming it really wonder and awe.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Mhm.
I want to look at the Q&A for a moment and then maybe read another poem from our packet. We hope we all received our poem packet before this gathering. We send them out usually on Sunday or Monday. When do we send them? Usually Sunday night. No, that's not right. That's the recordings. but early in the week, you will be receiving the packet at some point before we gather. So let's just see in the questions if there's something there that we feel we can address. Oh, here's an interesting comment. When Ada mentioned seeing or writing through the eye, someone in the chat heard that as I, right? EYE. Two different meanings with different outcomes, open or closed and constricted. Could you look at this? That is kind of fun to think of it as the other kind of I. And I think her intention was to say that she's trying in her work to let go a little bit of the personal story so that she feels less constricted in what she's writing. That was how I was hearing it. And I'm very pro all the pronouns. And so I do think it's good. Don't feel you can't say I in your poem. And certainly Ada says I in her poems too. So I don't think it's about that, just so we're not creating that misunderstanding, because there was a movement years ago, like, don't use the personal pronouns. But I don't think that's the intention. It's really just, what can I see that's beyond my own story? How can I include more? So it's not about leaving the self out of the work, but how can I include more of what's happening around me? Is that how you heard it as well, James? Or
Definitely. Yeah. It's that idea of inviting really more of the self, besides just the personal or smaller self into the poem or just into the way we're seeing, and inviting more of the world into our lives and how we're seeing things as well. I think we probably, those of us who are writers, we probably know what it feels like to be writing something and to just feel like it's subtle. So we really do have to retrain ourselves, like Danusha was saying, toward subtlety and nuance, but just this subtle pull of like, oh, there's an opening here. I always feel like when I'm reading or listening to Danusha's poetry that she's really good at knowing like, oh, this is when the poem wants to open, and just listening and allowing it to open. And it goes larger and she asks a question or makes this larger statement. And so that's, I think, read more Danusha's poetry if you want to know how to do that. That's why I read it, besides the beauty. But also, yeah, it's tuning into those openings. And then I think it goes both ways, that when we're tuning into the openings of whatever we're creating or putting out there, then we do the same in our own lives. So there are openings in a conversation, there are openings in a fight with your spouse, for instance. Not that I would ever know anything about that.
Of course not.
There are openings when we're out for walks. Just you get reattuned to these very tiny, almost like apertures that the attention can pass through.
Ooh, let's write that one down. You get very attuned to these apertures that the attention can pass through. I love that. For those of us who grew up with conventional cameras, especially, you had to set that aperture. Right. But I love that image. Just these little gateways or little spaces where we allow life to reach us. And how do we do that? The world to reach us. So thank you for talking about that. Perhaps an Ada poem now. I think I'll read the first one that's there in the packet, or maybe the second. Let's see. Oh, okay. I'm going to read the second, Instructions on Not Giving Up. I'm just seeing how much of her work is about surviving, how to keep going, how to endure with some of our joy, right? Instructions on not giving up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crabapple tree. More than the neighbor's almost obscene display of cherry limbs shoving their cotton candy colored blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains. It's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets leave the pavement strewn with the confetti of aftermath, the leaves come. Patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us. A return to the strange idea of continuous living despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it. The tree seems to say. A new slick leaf unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, what a perfect poem to share too, because it has that idea of continuous living that we were talking about earlier, and in spite of the mess of us, the empty, that fear and anxiety that we were discussing too. Yeah.
I love the simplicity of it. And I love that she turns it around. Someone I noticed just put a question in the chat about how to avoid cliches in writing, and especially about nature. And I think that when we really are paying a very particular attention and seeing what associations come into our mind, it's going to be odd. It's going to allow things in that aren't usual. Even this poem of Ada's, if we're looking at it through that lens, everyone praises the blossoms of spring. And she is not. She's saying, you know what? That's amazing. But even more than that, even more than all the flowering, and after all the petals have dropped and it's over, what about the leaves and the way that they come back? Like unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all. So admiring something that's a little off center, which we all do. There are things we all admire that are a little strange. I love the smell of horse manure. I don't know why. I grew up enough around horses, I guess, that I love that smell. And maybe it's more interesting to talk about that than saying I love the smell of a rose, because that's what everyone's saying. Or if I'm going to praise the smell of the rose, what's strange in it that I can bring in, or what memory enters that's unexpected.
Yeah.
So that's how I would speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to avoid at least the feeling of like, well, what can I possibly say that feels new about leaves, or trees, like or birds, in the case of Ada Limón, because she also writes a lot about trees and birds. And yet I think it does come back to what we're saying. Just what she accomplishes in that poem, Instructions on Not Giving Up, is this way in which she is able to talk about the trees and then move to us, the human, so that you almost don't know what she's talking about anymore. Like, is she talking about the humans? Is she talking about us? Or is she talking about the trees, until she more concretely moves back to that? And so there's almost this dissolving of any sort of difference between the trees and us, or the trees and her. And there really is no, I'll have to look at it really quickly to make sure I'm right, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of I in this poem, that it's more of a we, or placing herself in the voice, in the perspective of the tree. And in part, it's just, I think, moving beyond mere admiration or description, and trying to drill a little bit deeper when you're talking about the natural world or other people, or whatever you might be describing, that is just going to move it beyond cliche. Because when you go deeper, as you said, Danusha, then you start noticing the strangeness, or the surprises, and you're like, I actually don't like the flowers that much. It's like, those aren't the thrilling parts. It's the resilience of the trees, actually, that interests me, and the way that they open and sustain themselves throughout all the seasons.
Yeah, that kind of noticing that connects us. And I noticed Margaret asking in the Q&A, do we notice a situation if it does not affect us personally? And I think certainly we can and do, right? We're all so connected now, of just knowing what is happening elsewhere, or imagining into it. But because we receive news from everywhere every day, I think certainly we can talk about some of those things too, because they are affecting us in our bodies. We're so connected. It makes me think of when Jane Hirschfield was asked to define Zen as briefly as possible. And what did she say? Everything is changing. Everything is connected. Pay attention. Everything is changing. Everything is connected. Pay attention. So I think we can be attentive in this way to anything that comes into our consciousness, because we are connected to it. Whether we are noticing that most of the time or not.
Yeah. And I would say even those of us who are trying to pay attention are not noticing it all the time. And it's, and so it is being attuned to those moments when we do feel that sense of deeper connection, or aliveness between ourselves and the trees, or the animals, the birds, and even just the earth itself.
Yeah.
How about another Ada Limón poem?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to read it to us?
Sure.
Great.
I was going to read, it's the season I often mistake.
Right.
And I just want to say, this is one of those instances where I had this thought recently, like, almost like I was writing a poem, like, is it a bird or is it a leaf? Like kind of blowing across the frozen ground.
Yeah.
And then I read this in Ada's new book, The Hurting Kind, and was really struck with it. So it's one of these poems that is the title is also the first line. It's the season I often mistake birds for leaves and leaves for birds. The tawny yellow mulberry leaves are always goldfinches tumbling across the lawn like extreme elation. The last of the maroon crabapple ovates are song sparrows that tremble all at once. And today, just when I could not stand myself any longer, a group of field sparrows that were actually field sparrows flew up into the bare branches of the hackberry, and I almost collapsed. Leaves reattaching themselves to the tree like a strong spell for reversal. What else did I expect? What good is accuracy amidst the perpetual scattering that unspools the world?
Wow. Wow, that image of the birds being the leaves reattaching themselves, right? How do we not be in cliche? We go into the wonder of these, where our mind goes. Oh,
Yeah,
it looked like the leaves were flying back up.
right.
That's so gorgeous.
Yeah. And, I reading this out loud, I didn't necessarily catch this when I read it to myself, but there's that line where she says, and I almost collapsed. And I was reading it this time as the sense of I, as in this first person narrator that lives in our heads. I almost collapsed, almost went away completely. And I was just there with these field sparrows, reattaching like leaves to the tree. So just very
Wow.
connected to these ideas that we were already talking about.
That kind of gives me a shiver just when you said that I almost collapsed after talking with Ada and seeing where she's coming from right now in the writing.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think that double meaning is deeply there
Mhm.
in that line.
Yeah, and one of our participants, Janet, said a child's wonder. And I think that's absolutely right. That, I almost collapsed is getting back to the sense of being a child and in awe of so much of the world, or maybe getting back to this sense of just being a poet, which is what William Stafford always used to say, and what Naomi Shihab Nye reminds us too, that we're all born poets. We just, it's just covered up over time.
It just gets a little layer of dust over it.
Mm-hmm.
But we are, because children speak of the world in this way.
Yeah.
They don't know how not to, because they haven't mastered the language that obscures. They're just noticing things all the time. And something I feel called to say too in this context is, I know there are many poets out there who are like already in a writing practice. And then I know there are people who wouldn't consider themselves a poet or think, well, I can't be that. And I think it's so, we want to put out the welcome mat for having a writing practice.
Mhm.
Whatever you do with it, whatever you call yourself or don't. I remember talking with the late, great poet Lucille Clifton, and she did not call herself a poet. Personally, she didn't. Now that's really wild because for
wild.
so many people, of course, she's one of the pillars of American poetry, but it doesn't matter what we call ourselves or whether we want at this moment to take on that identity. Writing itself is such a powerful tool for getting to give ourselves that moment of connection.
Yeah. Yeah, and it almost doesn't matter either what you call what you write, whether it's a journal or, if you just write a little snippet of something, is it a poem? Is it not? Just kind of let it be. It's sort of the theme of today is letting the world be, but also letting our creation be whatever it wants to be. And
Yeah.
maybe taking the pressure off of ourselves when we do sit down to write, to have any sort of definition, or to be, productive as our culture often wants us to be, and to just like let it be something that actually holds us. I don't know where I would be in the last few years of this pandemic, of course, without all of you and the Poetry of Resilience and Danusha,
Yeah.
but also my own writing practice,
Yeah.
of sitting down every day that I can, not every single day, but every day that I can, and just doing some free form writing, sometimes a poem, journal entry, lots of complaining, letting it be whatever it wants to be.
Thanks for
And
that permission,
yeah,
James.
yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to actually bookmark that thing you just said and say a little more, because when we're talking about noticing and talking about awe, it's not about leaving out our own suffering.
Mhm.
Or, like if you look at this poem too, about the leaves and birds, there's that line. And today, when I could not stand myself any
Mhm.
longer, that gets to be on the page too.
Yeah.
We have those kinds of moments too, where what's in the background
Mhm.
of the wonder and awe is often our suffering,
Yeah.
is often our even self-hatred or exhaustion. The many conflicts that make us human, those get to be, and the complaints, as you said, those belong on the page.
Yeah.
And I felt
They
that what
do.
you're saying addressed a question a little bit too. Someone asked about poem length and are poems so long, they're short stories. Well, we had Ross Gay on last series, whose new book, Beholding, is one long poem, the whole book, about basketball. So certainly something that falls into the music, that musicality of language that poetry has, can be very short, can be a haiku, can be one line, or it could be a whole book, right? And it still gets to be a poem. That's kind of how I roughly hold that idea of genre.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and hi to Javan and Alex. That person knows old family friends that have known me since I was 6 years old. So I just want to send love
Aw.
back. A little talk about connection moment. So love back to them.
Mm.
All right. Shall we dig into another poem? I have one I could read that's in here.
Please do. Yes.
Okay. I love all of Ada's horse poems. So I put in a horse poem that I'd written years ago called Riding Bareback, from my first book, The Moons of August, about what it was to be a little feral sometimes as a kid and just riding horses without saddles out in the wilderness, in the hills of California. I mean, what a thing to do. I don't know if it's in here, but the real problem I had is I'd get so happy that I would start laughing and fall off. That's how I broke my tailbone.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I can see you laughing so hard that you
So
fall off a
hard.
horse.
At full gallop, you just feel like, oh my God, I'm flying. Bob fell off the horse. Okay. Riding bareback. We rode all afternoon along the barren creek bed, jumping boulders, kicking up dust, clutching the coarse manes. I wrapped my thin thighs around the bulging sides and hung on. It didn't matter. There were horse flies, heat, the itch against our legs, the dry grass full of ticks and ready to catch fire. We were 10 years old and flying past fields fringed with oak and aspen, held skyward, the earth, its rough stones and clumps of nettle, weightless below. For a while, we'd forget our spiral notebooks covered in glittered stickers, the careful shape of the words we etched inside, the the sardine can of the yellow bus where boys elbowed us in the ribs, grazing the small cones of our breasts. Whatever it was our fathers drank from the bottles they kept above the sink, whatever our mothers cursed as they soaked the dirty dishes, straightened the sheets, we were beyond it now. Crashing down into the empty creek, only to lift back up into the summer air. We were that light, that far outside the laws of gravity. Nothing could touch us.
Wow. Yeah, so such a perfect poem for what we're talking about. Just that word beyond really struck me, that we were beyond all of the troubles at home. We were beyond the sort of the boys on the bus elbowing, grazing our breasts. It's like accessing this freedom that isn't gendered, that isn't defined. You're not defined as a child, a girl, a student. It's beyond those definitions or those identities. And it seems really important for, I was going to say children to have, but it seems really important for all of us to have those spaces of play, wonder, awe, whatever we call these things that we're talking about.
It's that need to step outside ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, we all have a kind of sickness, I think, that comes of our current culture in this moment. And I guess most of us are in the US or North America, not all of us, but certainly where we live, there's a kind of sickness that says there's a better world than the world of the dirt and the grass and the trees. There's something better. That's rural.
Yeah.
And but is there a better world than that?
No.
Right.
Yeah, that's what your poem brings alive, that there is nothing better for that, and that I don't think we ever get away from aching for that desire, that need to just leave ourselves for a while. And certainly poetry and writing help with that for me. And I think I need more than that too, that feeds the poetry and writing, more of those playful spaces. Like I'm just remembering last year, it was around this time, my husband talked me into climbing the hill behind our house, and very snowy, and you get this amazing view from the top because there are no leaves on the trees yet. And then he's much more playful and in touch with that side of himself than I am. He started just sliding down the hill when we were coming back. He's like, where's your sense of adventure? Just slide down.
Just slide down.
And so I started doing it, and I was laughing harder than I had laughed probably since before the pandemic. And what did I do? I fell and hit my tailbone against one of the roots of the trees. And I was aching for days. I was okay, but I was aching for days. And yet, even now as I'm talking about it, maybe I should write about it, it was worth it. I would do it again in a second, even though I had to have the heating pad because I'm over 40 now, and eat the tailbone in the back. It was so worth it. So
I love that. Us and our tailbones that we've sacrificed in some way to that moment. But we want that moment, we need that moment to be out beyond ourselves. I have a friend who surfs every day and has for probably 20, 30 years. Gets up in the morning, gets in the ocean. It's my friend Vinci. And he said, everybody should do something where they feel like they're flying. And I'd never thought of that. Everybody should do something. He said, that's what it's like being on the waves. That's what it's like being on that galloping horse or sliding down that snowy hillside. Even crows are known to do that. Have you seen those videos where crows will slide down on their backs on the snow?
Oh, I haven't seen that. I know I've seen them like riding the waves in the wind, just kind of throwing themselves into the wind. Ravens and crows will do that. But no, I have not seen those videos.
Yeah, they kind of like they like the same sort of adventure sports. Yeah, the crows will do that too. They for the joy of it,
Yeah.
for the joy of it, right?
Yeah.
Animals too want to be in the joy. It's like Ada's dog, Lily Bean, she said loves to be in the Zoom room, wherever she's zooming. Lily Bean wants to be there listening in and present too. We are
Right.
not so different.
Yeah. And I think, okay, so this goes back to the word you wrote down earlier, which is surrender. Like
Yeah.
the sense of flying comes from surrendering yourself to something else, some larger force.
Yeah.
It can come while we're creating, while we're being artists or writing. Um, and it comes especially, I think, during physical things. And even if I'm walking, there are certain places where I walk where I can just like crest even a little hill. I come up, I see the mountains, and it feels like I'm flying, because I'm alone with my thoughts and just kind of letting things happen. So I guess this goes back to the earlier theme too, that it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much.
Yeah, it doesn't take much.
Yeah.
Just looking at the questions, I know we we like to be able to go, what are people wondering?
One thing I was going to say, just I know Nicole Brown was pointing to what you said to Nusha, that there's no better world than having that dirt under your fingernails, or being out riding a horse, going down to that creek bed and coming back up. So I thought another great prompt. I always love to do prompts where like that first phrase is filled in for me, and I can just kind of let my imagination fill in the rest. And so there is no better world than blank.
Okay, thank you.
And just maybe let it be a list, poem, journal entry, whatever it wants to be. But let your imagination or your intuition fill in the blanks for you and just see what comes up. I would bet that it will be a lot of like physical, tangible stuff.
It's not going to be a world of ideas.
No, or screens even.
Or screens, right? And Thomas More says, the spirit might be vast, but I'm paraphrasing, but the soul is particular. It likes certain food. It likes certain music. It likes places. The soul is specific. And I thought that was such an interesting thing to say. And that's maybe what we touch into a lot through poems, is the specificity of the soul.
Yeah. And what does the soul enjoy?
Yeah. What does the soul need and enjoy? And I'm also seeing that we could start a community of people with broken or injured tailbones. I was seeing that. The soul does not enjoy breaking the tailbone, but enjoys most of the things that lead to it.
Right. Yeah, just be careful. Please don't slide down a hill just because I said it.
Yeah, we would like you to sign a waiver. No. But I love that, this is our poetry church, as I said, for me and James. And I love that I know I'll be getting my prompts for the winter from this space too, from Ada talking about the water the way she was, her beloved creek, which I must have driven over just last week. Wish I'd known. And then this thing of there is no better world than.
Yeah.
What can we say about that? So thank you for that. I like when a poem can sort of at least start itself, a self-starting poem.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes it so much easier. And I think, I guess it's technically called anaphora if you're repeating the same phrase over and over again, which you could do or not do in the case of this. But when we were talking about journaling earlier, the other thing I was going to say is, maybe other people already do this, but I feel like poems are really good for getting us writing, even if we're not writing another poem, because it's such condensed language and it's just looking for your attention. So your attention is like the water added to the Tang or the Kool-Aid or whatever. And so it just makes this larger thing. But I feel like poems are really good for prompts. And so you might just read read a poem and see where it leads you, even if you don't think of a specific prompt. Let it open some part of you and see where it takes you. Yeah.
I love that. We all need to be so much kinder to ourselves. I don't know
Yes.
why that's what came through when you said that. We all need to be so much kinder to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I know I said to a college kid that was asking me a question about all the different problems in the world and what did I think was the most important thing to focus on. And, you know, I don't have to name the litany. We all know what the litany of problems is, those of us in this space. And I think it sometimes makes us think, I can't take that moment to be with how I'm feeling. There are all these problems out there. Those things are happening out there, and I need to help fix them.
Yeah.
And I just want to invite us to consider, and myself included, that being with ourselves, being with the world, that is so much of the remedy for whatever ails us as individuals and as a culture. It's so much of the remedy.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at a question Mark has here about the stifling power of anxiety and fear. What do we do when these are chronic? How do we write from these spaces? This is something I'm dealing with as well, actually, right now. So I want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
My husband and I had to move suddenly from our home. Some of you who know me may know that, but because we lived in this adorable barn out in a few acres for like 12 years, but as renters, and we had a sudden flooding, all these natural events, right? But that led to toxic mold issues. We've moved 6 times this month. We're now settling in. And I was re-experiencing so much physical anxiety.
Yeah.
Just having all those changes because I felt really destabilized. And because I was also working a lot, moving. I didn't write a lot, but sometimes there was a line. Sometimes there was just something I noticed and went, oh, that's an interesting idea. And I just wrote one line. And so sometimes we are just gathering seeds that may sprout later, but we don't feel we can tend them in that moment. That's okay. Gather some seeds. And if it's really hard to center and to face the idea of writing, set a timer for 5 minutes. A timer is your friend, or look at the clock. 5 minutes. Make it so small you don't even notice that you're giving it time. That's what I would say to that. As someone who can experience a lot of anxiety, I get anxious when I think, well, I don't want to get into writing about all that.
Right.
Or I don't know if I can face writing. I don't know if I can write anything good. Sometimes just the clock helps us to outrun those those kinds of issues and give ourselves just that 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think this goes back to what we were saying before, the idea that it doesn't take much. And I think we forget that as artists. I mean, one really good line a day would be pretty darn amazing. I mean, that would add up to quite a bit over time. And it may not fit our ideas for how, productive again that we want to be, or how soon we need to have a book published, or, whatever those outer pressures might be. As someone who has lived with very anxious people, my mother has chronic anxiety and agoraphobia. And as someone who inherited a lot of that anxiety, I know how really harmful it can be for creativity or just presence, being present in your day. And so what I've had to adopt is just really what we're talking about, that gentleness with the self, and that realization that, I can't compare myself and my needs to what other people need, not even my husband, not other family members,
Right.
because we all need different things. And I'm someone who seems to need a lot of downtime,
Yeah.
as much alone time as I can possibly get. I need to move, I need to be outside, and there are certain days when those things don't come, or when life just gets in too much. And so, there are other practices that you realize are very helpful. So my writing practice holds me. I mean, even this morning, without power, not knowing exactly if I was going to be able to zoom into this or not, but I'm
Right.
grateful that I was. I just said, I need to go write for a while and just kind of get some of this out of my head. So I think it can really help with anxiety and clearing away some of that, I don't know, gunk in the system. But just finding whatever works for you and trying different things, because as Ada said, it's so hard to write from a place of fear and anxiety. And I know what that's like. But when we're having those days, it seems like when I'm having an anxious day, that's when I want to be writing the most. And when it's, or it's like, oh, I have the time, but I'm feeling really fearful and anxious and not in that space. And so it's just about lowering those expectations. Maybe that's a day for reading and taking notes and seeing what happens, and just not placing all these expectations on ourselves. It's like Nicole Brown said with the Epiphany.
Yeah.
We just expect too much of ourselves sometimes, and we're all exhausted right now.
Oh my gosh, we're so exhausted. I really appreciate it, what you're saying. And Ada also saying that she lost faith in language almost for a while, and couldn't connect to it in the beginning of the pandemic. And just the sense that we want ourselves to be high functioning or something all the time.
Right.
And that's not a reality for most of us.
Right.
So really in this space, we're looking at how do we hold a thread of meaning. And I think honor smallness. That's what I keep hearing. What about the really small amount of writing time? Just a really little increment. Maybe you don't want to use a timer. Maybe you just want to go, and here's what I sometimes do. While I am waiting at the DMV, I will write. While I'm sitting alone at a cafe table, I will write. Just going, what is this increment that is limited by nature? While I'm watching the sunset, I will write. So we can also just pick a little corridor, smallness, and expect very little of it. Expect maybe nothing of it, except that it may connect us to what we're seeing.
Yeah, and one thing that I like to do sometimes is I call it an environmental scan, but it's sort of like just opening your senses to whatever is around you and just describing it. It can be a real way of grounding yourself back in the moment, grounding the body, which Tracy Fulton, one of our participants, is reminding us that anxiety is also hard on the body as much as it is the mind. And the body is a mind. And so bringing us back to the moment and back to all those sensory details that are around us and that are really luscious, but we just don't have that opening to receive them. So, it can feel false at first. It's almost like faking it until you make it with this practice, but I always feel better afterwards. I always feel more present. And then I've written something. I can say, let it be known that I wrote something today, and that's enough.
You wrote a thing. I know. I used to sometimes do writing play time with Dorian and Joe and Ellen, Dorian Lux, Joseph Millar, and Ellen Bass in the mornings. They would do it at 10 a.m. and I would go over and join. And afterwards, I remember everyone celebrating and saying, I wrote a thing. Now it's 11 a.m. because we'd hang out for an hour and I wrote a thing. Right. And you just feel so good. I go, okay, that's going back to being productive a little bit. But in a way that was making it really friendly too, just getting together with people to write. That's another thing that's available to us sitting in solitude, but also getting together with people and spending time writing. That is also a possibility when we're feeling we can't. And I think that addresses the anxiety question as well. When I was going through a time of writing about difficult life experiences that I'd had, and I didn't really want to sit alone at my desk for 2 hours doing that,
Right.
I would go write with a friend who would just be sitting quietly across the room writing in their own journal. We didn't have to talk, except if we wanted to share something we'd written after. But that was a really useful thing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, James, time.
I know. We're almost out of time already, and I could keep talking about all of this.
Me too. And keep reading poems and all of it. Maybe we can address one more thing chat wise, but I'm sorry we don't always get to everything, but we certainly are taking in all of your questions and doing our best. And I love that somebody added that Ada said it's okay. Sometimes we have to just live in the world to be able to write about the world. Not always about doing the writing, but about living in the world. So really that's maybe more the theme of this time that we're going to be spending together in this winter session of Voices of Nature. It's what is it to really live in the world? And maybe how can poems help us do that? That's kind of the secondary thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think if we can do that, if we can live a little more gently and more kindly in the world, then we'll all be better off. So I think those are wonderful intentions carrying forward. And I just want to remind everyone that we love your comments in the chat, and we get a download of all these chats, so we do read them. Sorry that we can't respond to everything, but we take it in afterwards. And for those of you who are new to the Poetry of Resilience journey with us, we do have a Facebook group that you're welcome to join. And it's become a lovely community where folks share poems that are published, things they're working on, questions they have, and even some of our guest poets are on there now. And so we invite you to join that if you're on Facebook. There's no pressure, of course, and we'll be happy to. And it's just Poetry of Resilience on Facebook. If you look it up, you should be able to join.
Thanks for mentioning that. It's like the little housekeeping of the things to let people know who may be new with us. So yeah, that's a space where you're free to share poems or thoughts about the group or pictures of Ada Limón with Lily Bean. We also really welcome because that was such a moment.
Someone did email us already, I noticed at the break.
Oh,
so
good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys, because that was just that I could have just sat looking at them all day. That was sort of an oxytocin boost or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that was Kim Sosin, I believe, who emailed us. So thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. We appreciate that. And we look forward to being with all of you and with Naomi Shabnai next week. We just are so blessed to be in these conversations that I know James and I feel have really helped carry us through the past year. Just to be in this rich conversation with people who are thinking about the world in a way that is layered and attentive, right, and kind. So we thank you guys for being part of it with us, and we look forward to catching up on everything in the chat that we didn't get to see during. I saw a good amount, but love to read through all of it. So thank you guys so much for doing this and for creating this community together. And we invite you to also, sometimes people have branched out and made writing groups or reading groups together from connecting through the Facebook where they can share contact information. So we want virtual community to translate into actual community up close as much as possible. So we encourage that behavior if it calls you. Right.
Well, thank you all again, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. And we feel so blessed to be joining you again next week with Naomi. So take good care of yourselves until then.
Till then, signing off.